All right.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to Unique Ways with Thomas Gerard, an audio podcast. Got a really special guest on today. He's an American independent type designer who works in St. Paul, Minnesota, and his typefaces are often inspired by lettering styles of the past, such as graphic design of the 1970s, Art Deco graphics, and wood type. Please join me in welcoming Mark Simonson. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Are you ready for your 20 questions?
Sure.
Okay, question one. Tell me a little bit more about yourself. What do you do?
Well, as you mentioned, I'm a type designer. I wasn't always a type designer. I went to school to study graphic design and commercial art and thought I would become an illustrator. Instead, I went into art direction for publications for a little while. And then eventually I got into graphic design and then product design, like packaging and things like that. And then over that period, over the several decades, I always had in the back of my mind to design typefaces, starting back in college in the mid '70s, and eventually I started making fonts on the Macintosh in the '80s and started releasing them in the mid '90s. And by 2005, I was doing type design full time.
Perfect. For the audience, Mark and I don't know each other until now, but we've had some typography people on the show. A good friend, Keith Tam, has been on the show, and we chatted about you coming on the show. And of course, Eric Speakerman was a key guest for us.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
So question two is, what's a key piece of knowledge that makes you different?
Um, well, I guess as a type designer, maybe the fact that I didn't start out just doing type design and nothing else. Since I have a background in graphic design and art direction, I think it gives me an edge over other type designers who maybe don't have that background because I have a sense of what works and what doesn't work in type and creating fonts. So I try to imagine something when I'm coming up with a new design that I would want to use myself as a graphic designer or as an art director. Um, and I guess the other thing that maybe is, I don't know, I guess I'm starting to wonder if this is really different or not, but I tend to have serial obsessions where I will be obsessed with one particular thing for like maybe if a couple of weeks or a couple of months or something like that, and just get kind of go down the rabbit hole. And um, it could be animation or architecture or some other topic or photography or whatever. And so computer programming maybe. And type design used to be one of those things where I would periodically become obsessed with it and then just lose interest. And so I'm kind of surprised that I've actually ended up sort of doing this full time because uh, at one time I wasn't sure if it would sustain my interest long enough to do it full time. So,
Great. Before the episode, I was researching you on YouTube and found this great interview with you. I think it was called Designers on Designers. And you're kind of sitting down with another designer chatting. And you've got this great kind of typography outfit. It's this gray blazer with this plaid underneath and these kind of slim blue jeans. And I was like, that's such a typography kind of thing. And it's so perfect in so many ways. And maybe that's something that makes you different.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of graphic designers tend to favor black in their wardrobe.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm not one of those.
Great. Okay, number three, why this of all things? Why do you do what you do?
Well, I think the type design uh, I think really works well for me because I mean I have an artistic side. Like I said, I one time wanted to become an illustrator or maybe a cartoonist or something like that. But I also have kind of my father was studied engineering and had a kind of an engineering mind, and he used to explain to me how things work all the time. And so I've always been sort of interested in the technical side of things and building things. And I think that the cool thing about type design is that it kind of it has little bits of both worlds. The design of the typefaces typefaces themselves requires some artistic talent and skill, but to make a font requires quite a bit of engineering and almost like programming skills. So the combination kind of suits me because I don't get, you know, focused just on one side of it and to the detriment of the other side. I can sort of switch back and forth between those two modes in my mind.
Nice. Okay. Some people struggle with number four, but the question is, what does your future look like?
Well, I'm for the near term, I'm uh, continuing to kind of work through my sort of back burner, I guess I call it, sort of some people call it the bottom drawer of, projects that they've started. I a few years ago, back in like 2016, 2017, I was kind of did a project where I just this is another one of those kind of things where I went down a rabbit hole. I was looking through. I have a drawer full of sketches of typeface ideas that goes back to the mid '70s, and I've just been collecting them over the years. And I just decided to scan them all in. I'd scanned some of them and decided to finish scanning them, and ended up with like something like 1700 scans, drawings that I scanned in. And I thought, well, this is cool, but how would I ever find anything in this? And so I basically went through and kind of like tagged them all, sort of picked out designs that seemed to be a coherent idea and gave them names, just kind of random names. And I ended up creating sort of a spreadsheet, kind of a database that listed all of the identifiable ideas that I'd had since the '70s, which came to something like 280, I think. And then I went through that and sort of categorized them and ranked them on ones which looked most promising and narrowed it down to a few dozen. And I've been gradually trying to go through those and actually finish them and release them. And I've already done that with about a half a dozen typefaces. And that's what I'm planning to do for as long as I can. So at least for the next, 5, 10 years. After that, I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
That's great. I'm kind of imagining you like checking out your drawings and kind of knowing all the DNA that goes into that drawing, what time period, what influences,
Mhm.
kind of for each of those drawings. We had Kitam in the studio and he was checking out this book manuscript that was sitting on a pile of books and he's like, oh, that's Stone Sands. That's what MIT Press uses. And his kind of instant recognition of that was so magical. And I love that about type designers.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Um,
you kind of get sort of obsessed with it, and it's almost like second nature. It's like recognizing people you know.
Great. Number five, let's talk about location. How does the notion of place play into what you do?
Um, I don't think it makes all that much difference, although I think living in the Midwest, there are a lot of type designers, I think, in the Midwest, more than you would think. I mean, there are also a lot in big cities like New York, um, just because of the publishing industry being there. Um, but but yeah, like I'm from originally from Wisconsin, and there's actually quite a few type designers who are from Wisconsin that are around right now. Um, I don't know why that is exactly, but I think it's just type design is kind of it's not a very flamboyant career to go into. It's not like you become famous or anything, at least not in the normal sense. uh, and so it's kind of a sort of modest, sort of conservative uh, craft in a way, and I think that Midwestern sensibility sort of, I don't know, is a good environment for that sort of activity. Not sure what else to say about it, but that could have something to do with it.
Great. Okay, number six. If you had to start from the beginning, what advice would you give your former younger self?
Um, well, I sort of feel like I wasted a lot of time in my 20s. Um, a little bit too much partying and doing dumb things. Like uh, smoking pot and things like that, and feel like I sort of squandered a lot of my energy and talent during those years. Although looking back, I was actually pretty busy doing things. I think it's maybe one of those things that on hindsight you wonder if I'd been a little bit more disciplined with myself, if I would have you know done more earlier on. It's not like I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't. It's not like I wasn't accomplishing anything, but as you get older, you don't have the same kind of energy you have when you're younger, um, the same kind of stamina and things like that. And so, uh, I guess my advice to anybody young is don't waste it. It's not gonna you don't get a second chance at it.
That's super interesting. But through persistence, you've managed to achieve what you wanted to achieve in a sense, right?
Yeah, yeah. But I sort of often feel kind of like a late bloomer. Like you look at a lot of certain type designers, they started out very young, even like as teenagers, and they're kind of the top of the field in a lot of ways. Like Jonathan Heffler and Tobias Fair Jones and people like that. Even Keith, I guess. Uh, you know, and they caught on to it really early at a very young age and got learned very fast. And that's the thing about when you're young, it's easier to learn new things. So uh, I think maybe I could have been even more successful at it. It's not like I'm complaining. I think I've done pretty well for myself.
Mhm.
So, I mean, then you take other people like Frederick Gaudy. He didn't really start designing his first typefaces until he was like 40 years old. And, it's like everybody knows who he is. Um, I guess his typefaces aren't as popular as they once were, uh, but yeah, he in some ways he was kind of a model for me uh, in terms of getting a late start in my type design career.
Great. Okay, number seven, what's a day in your life like?
Well, pretty boring actually. I mean, I usually try to deal with email and stuff like that in the morning. I don't drink coffee. I used to drink a lot of coffee, but I quit that a little while back. Um, that used to be the way I'd start every day, but now it's just a glass of water, which doesn't sound like it would be very stimulating, and I guess it isn't, but I do have my routines. Um, deal with the email and maybe look at places like Type Drawers, which is a sort of an online type designer community. Um, I and eventually I think I do most of my work, actual font work, in the afternoons. Um, Although it kind of depends on what I'm working on. If I'm in the middle of, I tend to work in like I'm more of a sprinter than a marathoner, where I tend to work in kind of intense stretches, like maybe going uh, for a couple of weeks and doing almost nothing else but working on a font. Um, Again, that's sort of like my serial obsession side of my personality, um, where I'll just get really focused on one thing. But the rest of the time, I'm kind of dipping in and out and kind of fighting distractions, I guess you might say. Uh,
Perfect. And almost halfway here, number eight, lifelong learning is a popular topic. How do you stay up to date?
I think that's definitely true of me. I've definitely, I mean, I went to school for 2 years and didn't even get my associate degree. Um, I meant to go back and I didn't do any electives and uh, for whatever reason, and meant to go back and finish, but it's like I skipped things like bowling and archery and things like that. But I never finished, and it didn't really seem to be an impediment to getting the kind of work I wanted. Um, but at the same time, I've always been kind of a self-taught kind of person. I didn't take. I mean, I did have some training in college for doing lettering, and design my first typeface design in college as a project, but the teacher wasn't really a type designer or anything like that. It was really just you know, it wasn't any, there weren't any sort of formal classes in how to design typefaces at the time. So I'm almost completely self-taught as far as type design goes and using the software. Um, I've taken very few, if any, I don't think I've taken any classes in type design. It's all just been things that and I've always been kind of like that, wanting to just figure things out on my own rather than have somebody tell me what to do. Um, um, my it makes me think of when I was a baby. My mother said that she used to try to feed me, with a spoon, and very quickly I just grabbed the spoon and wouldn't let her do it. I wanted to do it myself, and I've always kind of been like that.
Nice. Number nine, what tools do you use? Are you both digital and analog?
Mostly digital when it comes to type design. I do sketches on paper, either with pens or pencil or whatever, but they're not really anything like finished sketches. Some people do very tight finished sketches when they draw on paper, but I've never really done much of that. Um, the sketches are really more notes to myself. They're a way so that I can remember what the ideas that I come up with. So there's sort of a shorthand means of recording my ideas so that I can then work on them on the computer later on. But they need to be refined, and it's really more like they remind me what I was thinking of, so I can then work on them on the computer. But I've gotten to the point where working on the computer, I can work much faster and get to the final result much more quickly than I ever could on paper. I'm just used to the working with digital tools. Going back to, like I said, I've had a Mac since they first came out, and been using Illustrator since it first came out, and various type design software tools. Um, right now, I'm using Glyphs, which is a Mac app that's been out for about maybe 10 or 15 years. And I really like it. Before that, I used FontLab, and before that, Fontographer. Um,
Perfect. Number 10, how do you deal with work-life balance?
um, I don't, I don't know. I mean, some people would think I'm a bit of a workaholic because I tend to spend like 80% of my time in my office where I work. Although I wouldn't say that I'm working all the time. Um, I tend to not be the sort of person that does just a normal sort of 9 to 5 schedule. I tend to work when I'm in the when I'm sort of kind of it's not inspired to do it, but um, like when I'm really into working on something, I just work on that and almost nothing else. So I sort of, but it could be in the evening, it could be early in the morning, it could be any time of day. If I'm trying to finish something, if I'm really on a roll, I'll just work, around, just stop to eat meals or whatever. Other times, I'm not really doing that much quote unquote work, um, but I am always sort of trying to learn new things and looking at resources online, watching videos about different techniques and things like that, reading books, looking at books. Um, yeah.
Nice. And if you weren't doing what you do now, what would you be doing?
That's hard to say. I mean, it was kind of funny in the I mean, there's a lot of things that I'm interested in. I, you know, I did try to kind of get into hand lettering in the early 2000s before my type design career really took off. Um, that's kind of related to type design, so it's not really something different. Uh, Illustration is something that I've been interested in my whole life, in cartooning, and so I've often wondered if that would be an alternative if I hadn't found type design. But I'm also interested in like things like filmmaking and stuff like that. But again, it's like one of those things where unless you really get into it seriously when you're young, I think it's difficult to get into it later. Um, so I end up being sort of an armchair expert at these things where I read a bunch of books about making your own films or whatever, but I never actually do anything.
I remember in the interview, hearing you talk about how a lot of the early type that you were involved with was essentially lettering, and how you submitted to ITC and had that first one rejected. Would that first typeface have been a bit illustrative in a way, or?
Not really. I mean, in a way, it was, well, it sort of turned into a font that it did release, one of my early releases, a typeface called Kundal, which is a serif typeface, kind of a sort of halfway between a Latin and a Slab face. But it's it was it was kind of interesting when I did the typeface that I submitted to ITC, which was quite a bit different from Kundal. I mean, it has some elements that are the same, but it was much less refined, I guess. And it's kind of like I had this idea for this shape of serif, as if that's like the key to creating a new type design is to come up with a new serif shape. Uh, and then the rest of the design was less thought through. And it I think at the time I thought it would be easier, and I also assumed that like the basic idea was all they would need, and then they would help me sort of uh, do the rest of the project, that they would have people who would, be experts who would kind of hold my hand in the project and in the process and end up with a finished font. But it um yeah, it was, I mean, looking back, I made a lot of mistakes. And I even realized that when it was rejected, that there were problems. Even before I submitted it, I tried to set some paragraphs in the font. I made like my own transfer lettering sheets in order to make the submission look even, more impressive or whatever. And as soon as I tried to set type with this typeface that I'd created, I realized that the serifs were too big. They were getting in the way, and it interfered with getting even spacing. And the only way to get even spacing would be to overlap the serifs, um, which was an interesting idea. Maybe, I mean, maybe that is a valid way to do a typeface design, but it's not what I anticipated when I was doing the design. And so I learned something from that. And nowadays you can figure things out like that much quicker when you're working on a computer, because you can see right away if there's problems that you didn't anticipate when you first thought of an idea. Back then, it would be, it could be weeks or months before you realized your mistake. So, yeah.
Super interesting. Number 12, what would you not like to do with your career?
What would I not like to do? I guess like generally, the things I don't want to do with my career, I don't do. uh, so I guess I wouldn't want to get stagnant. I wouldn't want to just be. I mean, one thing that's been really great for me is when I had some success with Proxima Nova, it allowed me to not take on any custom design type design projects, which it's not that I'm against that, but the thing about doing retail typefaces, where you just create a typeface and release it, compared compared to doing custom typefaces, is that there's no client involved. I had done client work previously as a graphic designer, and that was fine. But there was something about the idea of just generating the ideas on my own, releasing them, and if people either buy them or they don't, that was much more. It made I felt like an artist really for the first time in my life since college, where I was basically coming up with ideas and releasing them and seeing, if people liked them, then they bought them. If they didn't, they didn't. Whereas when you're working with a client, you're really sort of um, a vehicle for their concepts. They're calling all the shots. You may not agree with their decisions or the directions they want to go. But when you're creating your own typefaces and releasing them, it's all on you. It's like you're either validated or not, depending on whether how the market reacts to it. So I guess being sort of having a regular job like that, or just doing that kind of more conventional work is something that's not something I ever want to go back to.
So it sounds like you're saying that type design can be an art practice or a design practice, and you favor the art one.
Yeah, I mean it is also a design practice, but it's like you're not. I mean, to me, like my definition of commercial art. I mean, they don't really call it commercial art anymore, but that's what when I was growing up, that's what we called it. And the difference between art and commercial art is that with with commercial art, um, you are being hired to tell somebody else's story. Whereas when you're doing art, just as an artist, you're telling your own story.
Mm-hmm.
And that difference, I really didn't think that was important to me until it actually became sort of what I was doing um, when I was able to just uh, make type, make my living just creating typefaces that I came up with on my own and not for somebody else. Now that's doesn't always suit everyone. Some people that's an uncomfortable role to be in. They're very stimulated by having to solve other people's problems, and I am too in a lot of ways. But um, but I think after decades of doing that type of design, um, once I found myself sort of just generating things on my own um, and producing them was became very fulfilling for me.
Great. 13, what's your favorite word, quote, or sentence?
What was the question again?
Your favorite word, quote, or sentence.
Oh, favorite word, quote, or sentence. I heard you ask this one to Ray Larrabee, and I was thinking, oh my God, what am I going to say for that? Um, well, this is going to sound weird, but um, uh, I was a big fan of National Lampoon magazine when I was younger. And there was a writer who used to work for them, Michael O'Donnell, who he also, I think he wrote and appeared on Saturday Night Live back in the early years. And he did something in the magazine once. It was just a page, like sort of like a little mini poster. And it just said, life. One thing led to another. And before we knew it, we were dead. And I don't know what it is about that quote. It's sort of like almost like Carpe Diem or something. Like don't forget that someday, you may not be around. And urge it just to not, I mean, the way I interpret it is to not, it sounds a little morbid, but it's basically not to take life for granted.
Nice. And how about a least favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Oh God, I don't know. I mean, I don't like sort of buzzwordy sort of things, like hang in there or
Hmm.
things like that. I guess cliches. I don't like cliches. I can't think of one specifically exactly, but I don't like cliches.
Great. And 15, if you had to pick one word to describe yourself, what word would you choose?
I guess obsessive.
What keeps you up at night?
um, let's see. I guess things don't usually keep me up at night.
Okay. Do you have a
There was one thing. I mean, if sometimes when I make a when in the past when I've made a business decision that on hindsight I thought maybe I shouldn't have done that. That has kept me up at night.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
things like things that maybe would have like I should have done that differently. Like
Mm.
in
Do you have a
looking
dream
back,
you're chasing?
a dream that I'm chasing.
Mhm.
Well, this is nothing to do with type design, but I would like to do a complete animated short film, like like a cartoon short.
Very cool.
Um, but and I'm sort of been playing around with animation software and been interested in animation since I was a teenager and kind of playing around with it. But I'm not very good yet at it. Um, so I don't know if it'll ever happen, but that is something I'd like to do at some point or complete at some point.
Cool. And final stretch number 18, what inspires you?
What inspires me? I'm inspired by anyone who does something really well. Um, whether that's in art or design or lettering or type or film, anything, any sort of creative pursuit that somebody is really good at it. That inspires me.
Number 19, any advice you'd like to share?
Well, I guess if someone's interested in type design, I think a really valuable um, thing is persistence. It's not the sort of thing you can just sort of do in a few afternoons. Um, and it's the sort of thing that I think maybe I didn't have as much of when I was younger. And so maybe I wouldn't have been well suited to type design when I was younger. But yeah, I think persistence is one of the most important things, um, or if you want to be a type designer.
Great. And number 20, do you have a call to action? Is there some way we can keep tabs on you?
Well, I've got my website at marksimonson.com where you can find all my fonts. I have a blog there where I occasionally write things. Hasn't been as frequent as it used to be, but I did recently write something that I got a lot of reactions from called 1979 about kind of reconnecting with the analog world after spending so much time using computers. Um, but yeah, that's probably the best place. I'm also on Instagram at I think it's at Mark Simonson, and also on Twitter, same handle.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's such a, I mean, having you specifically on is a great pleasure, but you're adding to this community of type designers that we're building. As you mentioned, Ray Larrabee was on and Keith and Eric Speakerman.
Mm-hmm.
It's starting to really build out in this way. So I'm super excited to see this happen. Thanks for being a part of it.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was my pleasure.